Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, brothers and sisters in Islam. Welcome to another edition of TMA Talks. I'm your host, MENJ. Today, we have invited a guest from Qatar. He's a real Quranic studies scholar of American descent. Welcome to the show, Dr. Joseph Lumbard. How are you?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, Dr. Lumbard, I'm very happy and thankful that you have decided to come to my show. So to be honest, I didn't expect that. So maybe maybe okay. So just to break the ice, maybe perhaps you can introduce yourself, your background, and of course, everyone wants to hear a reversion story. So maybe you can tell us how you came to Islam and so on.
I'll talk a little bit about that. So my name is Joseph Lumbard. I'm a associate professor of Quranic Studies at the College of Islamic Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Doha. So for my story, first of all, I'm going to say something here that some Muslims might not like to hear, but I think that we focus too much on this issue of reversion stories. People like to hear reversion stories because it gives them kind of an iman rush or something. But that's really temporary. I mean, for every story of somebody who is converting to Islam, you're going to find a story of somebody who converted to Christianity. And just as the stories of somebody who left Islam for atheism don't say anything about the truth or falsity of Islam, the stories of somebody who embraces Islam don't really say anything necessarily to that. The real issue is for us to look within it and find that which nourishes our hearts, not to look to other people to get to kind of reinforce our own identity. And that's why I do talks like this with people on their podcasts and their YouTube channels. Now, as for my own story, I mean, really, I've always been a person who was fascinated with the transcendent, with the metaphysical, the spiritual, and as a result, I studied many world religions. And as I was going through this process, I continually tried to find a kind of a home for myself within Christianity. And I didn't really find a home for myself within Christianity. So I was reading a lot about Islam, and I met some very good Muslims where I was in university at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. at the time. And I gradually came to find that everything that I had been looking for within Christianity was found within Islam, and that even the practice of Islam was far more conducive to the kind of life that I was seeking. And a religion that didn't have esoteric doctrines that were difficult to grasp on its basic level of iman. So it very much appealed to me, and it's something that fit within my life very well. And alhamdulillah, I embraced Islam something like I guess it's 30 years ago now. And so I always tell people I've been a Muslim long enough to become a bad Muslim. And alhamdulillah, I mean, that's my story in brief.
Yes, very good, doctor. So, would you say you were practicing Christian before, or otherwise?
I wasn't so much at the time that I embraced Islam. I had been a practicing Christian, up into my teen years, but then, I didn't really go to church much anymore. But before that, when I was younger, it's something that I had very much identified with, but I was never a staunch Christian or anything.
I see. All right. So, everyone has their own, reversion story. I think I suppose you would agree with that, right? So,
Oh yeah.
yeah. So anyway, so maybe you can tell us why Quranic studies? What do you find fascinating about the Quran? Why do you decide to go into Quranic studies, not Sirah? There's so many, there's such a wide range of Islamic studies, right? So why Quranic studies specifically? Yeah.
Well, I mean, Quranic studies has always been interesting to me. One of the reasons is that when I was at Yale, Professor Gerhard Bovering, with whom I studied, that's one of his areas of specialization. And I also did Sufi studies. In fact, my dissertation was on Ahmed al-Ghazali, the brother of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. I just say it in the Persian because he wrote more in Persian and he's more known in that universe. So I did my dissertation on that. I didn't actually do it in Quranic studies, although I was working in Quranic studies as a graduate student. And I always pursued dimensions of Quranic studies and taught Quranic studies in my first jobs. But it really crystallized as a discipline that I was more dedicated to in my research when I started working on the study Quran. and that became a large project. It took us almost 10 years to complete. And then as I was going through that, I realized more and more that there's a kind of a niche within the Western Academy that isn't filled. And to be honest, there's a lot of people in the Western Academy who don't want it to be filled, which is the niche wherein we employ, you might say, contemporary modern scholarly techniques, but still speak about the teachings within the Quran, and some of the broader theological implications of the Quran.
That's right. That's right. So you know that especially when we are talking about Quranic studies, especially in the Western academia, most of those scholars are actually critical of the of the origins of the Quran. There's revisionist studies like from people like John Wansber, like Michael Cook, and Patricia Crone. What do you think of those kind of studies?
I think
Vis-a-vis.
I think that revisionist studies has been extremely irresponsible. When you look at revisionist studies, it's not really even studies. A lot of it is, it doesn't even rise to the level of theory, because a theory is something that is practical and methodical, and that another person could then go and apply and, in a sense, backtest by going through that theory. Whereas what we see really more with books like John Wansbrough's Quranic Studies and Cook and Crone's Hagerism, to which you were referring, that those are speculations. And they're very irresponsible speculations, given that they could have gone to the manuscripts that were available in European libraries at the time and really done historical studies using techniques, methodologies that were available within Western academia to assess the history. Instead, they built very fanciful kind of revisions, as you say, of the historical account in order to come up with entirely new speculations about the time periods in which the Quran originated, how it was composed, etc. All of which have been completely debunked since the origin, since the beginning of very serious manuscript studies. We could point to Francois de Roche as, in a sense, being the real father of that movement. But there have been some more extensive studies or more detailed studies since his time, such as those of Bahman Sadiqi on the manuscripts from Sana'a, and further details that have been coming out over the past, I would say, really over the past 15 years or so. There's been an incredible movement in manuscript studies, especially now that all of these studies are in fact, or all of these manuscripts are in fact available online. And anybody who really wants to check the record can do it, rather than developing these kind of fanciful speculations.
So I think that the speculations they range from dating the Quran to late in the 8th or 9th century, or basically even up to the Abbasids. Some of these claims actually say that the Caliph that built the mosque at the Dome of the Rock at Al-Aqsa.
Yeah, that's under the Umayyad period. Yeah.
Yes, under the Umayyad period, right? Okay, so sorry. Under the Umayyad period, the claims range from the Umayyad period, that the Quran was compiled during the Umayyad period, to that the Quran was originally written in Syro-Aramaic. I'm pretty sure you have come across this ridiculous claim. So so you would say all
Well, yeah,
these claims are basically just speculations, right?
well, those were speculations at the time that they were written, and now they've been completely debunked by the examinations of the manuscript record, and further examinations of and I mean, Michael Cook hasn't written a retraction of Hagerism, but in his studies of the stemma and Abu Amr Adani's study of the Masanif, of the Masahif, that is, of all the manuscripts, he's demonstrated that that this study, and Abu Amr Adani did not know the methodology of studying stemma to come back to an original source, but it's essentially what he was doing, and that his studies of these different manuscript traditions point to a single a single source for all of the various manuscript strands that came out. And that was really actually a very important article on the stemma of the Quranic manuscripts, and in a sense, one could almost see it as kind of a retraction of some of the things that came out in Hagerism. But that's just one example. I mean, the manuscripts is where we really look, and when we look at the manuscript studies, because the manuscripts are material evidence. And within the Western Academy in particular, everything is about scientifically verifiable material evidence. And when you're going to get down to scientifically verifiable material evidence, that's the manuscripts. And the study of the manuscripts really does now point to an origin of the Quran within the period that Muslims identify as the period of the Caliphate of Uthman.
MashaAllah, that's so that's so that's so beautiful to hear. Anyway, so since you mentioned the dating of the earliest Quran to that of the manuscript to the time of Uthman, basically you are reaffirming the Islamic narrative, the standard Islamic narrative regarding the compilation of the Quran, where when the Prophet passed away, everyone memorized the Quran by heart, but it's just that the written form of the Quran was scattered and it was not compiled yet, right? I mean, do you, of course you know this, basically this is the standard narrative, right? And then during the Battle of Yamama, during the rule of the Caliph Abu Bakr, most of the Hufas, they died in battle. So Caliph Abu Bakr commissioned that these written scraps were compiled into one book, into one mushaf. And this primordial copy is to be kept at Hafsa's house. So what do you say to this?
There are some dimensions of that narrative that, we could, even as Muslims, we go in, like, how many people actually, died during the Ridda wars? How many Hufaz actually died? And is that really what was the impetus? Well, I mean, that's a historical dimension of it that can be debated, and even Muslim historical records would point to different indications there. But yeah, I mean, so the first collection under the Caliph Abu Bakr, and exactly what that collection was, that's still, even among Muslim sources, that's debated. I think that Mustafa Al-Athami has done an excellent job on his book on the collection of the Quran.
Yes.
And that's really the source that I would tell young Muslims to go to in order to understand that account, especially when he goes into the details of the difference between the project that was done under the Caliph Abu Bakr, and then radiyallahu anh, and then the project that was done under the Caliph Uthman. And how they were. And I think he gives a very good analogy that it's almost like you collected everything together under the caliphate of Abu Bakr, but then under the caliphate of Uthman, it was like you put everything in the exact order in which it was, and then you double checked everything. It's like you're really reviewing for your final exams, and now you're putting everything in its exact order and double checking everything, and going to your, I mean, it's obviously not the same, but going to your classmates and double checking against your classmates' notes and making sure that they've got these same things. And so it was an awareness that there was going to be, that this was going to be a document that was going to go out further and not just be a collection, and that therefore it had to be done in a very rigorous fashion, double checked against the previous collection as well.
Right, that's right. So I guess between the times of Abu Bakr, when the Mus'haf was first compiled, and to the time of Uthman, there wasn't much controversy regarding the compilation of the Quran. Would you say that is so?
Between the time of Abu Bakr and Uthman?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would say I don't think that there is. I think that, again, I think that Ahruf has done an excellent job.
I guess so. I think the so-called problem started during the time of Uthman, when the empire was growing and people were starting to recite the Quran in different ways, right? So what was the issue actually during the time of Uthman that caused Uthman to call a committee and to come to this one single version of the Mus'haf? Yeah, so maybe you can tell us
the
that.
story is that people came to Uthman and they said, they reported to him that people on, in a sense, the edges of the empire. I mean, you take people from, we're talking about an empire that had grown up into, what is, I mean, even in today, which is Tajikistan, and all the way across Africa and such. So, I mean, really, and people were just saying, you need to collect this ummah on one single mushaf, because it's gonna kind of just grow out of control. And if you think about it, I mean, this is correct. just scientifically. This is how things change over time, and so the idea was to kind of put a lid on that diversity or potential diversity in different recitations, which would then make the whole understanding of the text deteriorate. And to what degree did that actually happen? Well, we don't exactly know, but we do know that there was a project to collect a single text and make that a standard text that would be read throughout Muslim lands.
Yeah. So what happened to the original way of preservation? Though, because we were already using memorization as a way to preserve the Quran. So we weren't reliant on the text itself. So was there a factor that changed this, that caused Uthman to start to have copies of the Quran in written form and to send it out throughout the empire? Was there a reason for this?
Well, I mean, so what I just said. So that was that, to kind of keep the ummah on a single mushaf. That was the idea. I mean, that was successful, and there were stories, for example, of Abdullah bin Mas'ud having his own mushaf. And up into the 5th century or so, there are reports of different manuscripts that report to be the Mus'haf of Abdullah bin Mas'ud around. And so this wasn't really that big a deal for Muslims to say that some of the companions had slightly different ordering of surahs, and even places where they might have slightly differed on some phrasing. And this really, for Muslims, though, this is in our own historical record, and all of the fuel that people try to get from it. This is something Muslims really never had a problem with, because the idea that there had been differences of opinion, and that basically there were minority opinions that weren't correct, were out there. That's something that the whole historiography of Islam accounts for, and even the methodologies that we have for dealing with that history account for that.
So would you say that the written Quran, as compiled by Uthman, totally tallies with the memorized or with the recited version which the Muslims have had since the beginning of Islam? Would you say that it's exactly the same word for word?
I don't know what you mean by that, because in terms of there's what Sahib Said has referred to as Hafs normativity, is the period that we live in now, where that's become standard. And no, it wasn't a Quran written in Hafs. I mean, it was, and Hafs wasn't the dominant style of recitation back then. But in terms of, because it's what you call, it was just the rasam. And which is just the bare outlined text, and even places where you'd have long vowels, the way that we mark long vowels today wasn't done in that rasam.
Yes.
And so to say that it's like exactly the same is incorrect. It's to not understand the development of orthography throughout Islamic history, and the orthography developed in multiple different ways. And it's not until the Abbasid period that you really have very standardized orthography across the empire. And even then, when you have that orthography, you do have some manuscripts that are definitely preserving some of the recitation styles that are not considered canonical recitation styles today.
I see. So I would say that when you say recitation styles, I would guess you are referring to the Ahruf, the Qiraat.
The Qiraat.
The Qiraat, yes.
So the Ahruf and the Qiraat are different. This
Maybe you
thing that
can,
Muslims
yes,
have of wanting to
yes.
say that the Ahruf refers to the Qiraat, that's not what's happening.
Okay, so maybe you can explain to us, because there is some confusion, as you say, between what
there's a
is
lot
the
of
Ahruf and what is the Qiraat.
confusion. That's an effort to kind of try to smooth out the history. And history is not smooth. I mean, you can't. There's no period of history when you can go back and say, oh, we've got the full picture. But look, if you want to go back to a historical period and say that we've got a pretty good picture of it, the picture of the period of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and this period in which the Quran is collected, we've got a pretty good picture compared to a lot of other periods of history. I mean, try to figure out what was happening in what is currently the United States in that period of history. Good luck. You've got nothing preserved. Or in in any of the Americas. Good luck with that. And multiple other periods. And then you go back, try to figure out what was happening in the period of the collection of the Old Testament. It's still an unknown. We really don't know how these books came together as they did into the document that we now call the Old Testament. But as historical records go, this is a very thorough record. As manuscript records go, this is an incredibly thorough record.
Okay, so
And the Sana'a
yeah,
manuscripts give us an even more thorough record.
all right.
But don't try to artificially smooth it over by saying that the Ahruf is a reference to the Qiraat, which then became the seven styles. That's really not how it went.
Okay,
And when Muslims try to attach to this and try to smooth that over, they actually end up presenting themselves with arguments that will later fall apart.
I see. I see. So on that note, since you mentioned the New Testament, we have to speak about that a bit. So just to backtrack a bit, yeah, since we are already, I mean, since you have already touched on the New Testament, so maybe I can ask you this: how does the Quranic compilation of the Quran actually differ from that of the New Testament, or and also would it be fair to apply, modern biblical textual criticism methods to the Quran, to the text of the Quran?
No, it's useless to apply modern biblical textual criticism methods to the Quran. And there have even been books where people have done that have proven to be a very not very solid contributions to the field, shall we say, like the book of Keith Small. Keith Small, everybody's told me, was a very nice person, but his book on Quranic manuscripts really tries to apply this kind of New Testament textual studies model to the Quran, which just doesn't work, because we have a much more solid record of the Quranic manuscript tradition than we do of the New Testament tradition. Now, even in the New Testament tradition, you've got situations where there were kind of intentional changes to manuscripts in order to substantiate the doctrine of the Trinity, and this is well known. We don't have anything where we can point to that within the Quranic manuscript tradition. The recent book by David Powers, and Muhammad is not the father of any of your men, he tried to do something like that. It was just an absolutely utter disaster of scholarship. He tried to take one scholarly tradition wherein there is one instance of a word that is written differently than it is in all of the other manuscripts, and argue that this one was indicating the reality of what had been the Islamic teaching, which is exactly what you do not do in manuscript studies. In manuscript studies, if you have one that is different and a whole bunch of others that are testifying to a different reading, then you use that as the outlier, and especially if there isn't any major time difference, which there isn't here. So this kind of argument that Powers was making is really actually kind of a travesty of scholarship. And I think that Walid Saleh wrote an excellent review, or really deconstruction of Powers' book, demolition, you might even call it, of Powers' book and Powers' argument. But this is where, even when you look at the New Testament, even into the 20th century, not all Christians agreed upon which books of the New Testament. The Syriac Church still had a different New Testament, and they've kind of recently been like, okay, we'll go along. But this is a development within the 20th century that's occurred. So this idea that would have and even when Christians were first putting together their Bible, there was a debate as to which Gospels there were. These 4 Gospels, but there's a whole bunch of other Gospels, and then exactly how those Gospels came together, and there's still some debates about that. We
Yeah, they
don't
can't
really
even,
have that.
they can't even agree on the authorship of those gospels. They don't know who wrote those gospels. You see?
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not, that whole thing and the idea of there being apostolic succession. Okay, fine, have your apostolic succession, and you can make that argument. Even then, it's just a manuscript tradition that you don't have the kind of coherence throughout the tradition that you have within the Quranic manuscript tradition. And so to try to start using the methodologies that were developed in New Testament studies and apply them to the manuscripts of the Quran is to assume that the Quranic manuscript tradition had something of the same history as the manuscript tradition of the New Testament, and that is simply not what happened. So so it really is, you have to develop a methodology to deal with a particular problem set. And so that is that's the approach. And
Yes,
I think
yes,
that you see mistakes that happen like this just all the time, and they get then repeated within the field of Quranic studies because people kind of assume that we have to follow the biblical studies methodologies and the biblical studies
yes,
kind of
yes.
outline.
And I think that's actually the issue with Western scholarship for Quranic studies, because they rely on these methodologies that you say, which is applied to the New Testament, but they apply it to the Quran. And I think that is an issue, right? Because basically the New Testament and the Quran are totally two different books with two totally different histories, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So let's go back again to the compilation of Quran. So there is, of course, the issue where, of course, okay, let's go back to Uthman. So he called the committee and he asked the committee to decide on a mushaf. So the committee finally came to this final mushaf, right? And then there was this order from Uthman to burn the rest of the other manuscripts that disagree with this mushaf. So maybe you can share us your view about it, because this has been polemicized over and over again, not only by Christian missionaries, but the Orientalists. So maybe you can tell us the significance of this event and why Uthman came to this decision.
Of
Yeah.
ordering the burning of the Masahif. I mean,
Yes.
that's something that the idea is first of all, I mean, which Masahif are we talking about? Well, I mean, I don't, we don't really know, but the issue is that they are written in multiple different ways. There isn't a this is a time also when orthography is very incomplete. So what exactly were people writing? How were they making notations and things along those lines? And in fact, there were other people who were just like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not doing that. So I don't think that, I think that people have tried to make more out of it than was there. Like what's happening there is that people are trying to fall into the idea that, that Islam is this, authoritarian system that was oppressing people and imposing this upon people. And, we don't have any indication that this is what happened. The only indications that we have from people who objected to this is that it was like, oh, okay. And Abdullah bin Mas'ud is the main one.
Yeah.
Abdullah
Yeah. I
bin
think I
Mas'ud
think it
is
was
just like
Abdullah ibn Masud and Ubay, right? Ubay ibn, I forgot his name. Yeah.
Ubay bin Ka'b.
Ubay bin Ka'b. Yeah. Yeah. I think those two were the ones,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so the companions that are reported to have had Masahif are like Abdullah bin Mas'ud, Salim al Hudhaifa, Ali bin Abi Talib, Ubay bin Ka'ab, and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Salim al Hudhaifa, he's actually one of the ones who died in the Battle of Yamama. And he was one of people who was a Quran teacher as appointed by the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then people have tried to make a lot of hay about what was in Ali bin Abi Talib's Mus'haf and things along those lines. And first of all, there's just not enough in the historical record to say that there were these major differences. So that's assumed in the first place. And secondly, there's also indications of people such as Abdullah bin Mas'ud who were just like, I'm not burning my my Mus'haf. And the caliph was just like, okay. So they didn't try to enforce that
So
or push that
so
on anyone.
basically when Abdullah ibn Masud refused to burn his manuscript, he wasn't taken away from him. Yes, because I think some Orientalists actually say this. They say that they were forced. Those who refused actually had their masahif taken away from them, and it was burned regardless.
I mean, I honestly, that part of the account, I don't know about. But like I said
Mhm.
before, there was multiple manuscripts that were going around that were attributed and said to
Mm,
be the Mus'haf of Abdullah bin Mas'ud.
mm,
Afterwards, I mean, I think that this is a situation where we don't know exactly
yeah.
what happened. We don't have the suhuf of Hafsa. So that's a thing where different people are going to have different accounts, and
Yeah.
to go back and read into it as some kind of instance of authoritarian oppression is a way that people who want to read things that way, that's the way they're going to read them, and there's not really much that you can do. But again, I mean, this was really it was a community effort that was being done among the Muslims, and everybody in Medina knew of this effort. There isn't a record of some large group of people who were opposed to this and rising up against the effort or something along those lines.
I see. I see. So basically, you're saying that everyone in the community agreed to this, so there was no real opposition to this, except
I'm
for.
not saying everyone agreed to it. I'm saying it wasn't such a big deal
Oh, okay. Right.
as some
Right.
people
Right.
want to make it out to be. Look,
Okay.
when
All right.
people are
All right.
trying to read into it as it's this great instance of
Hmm, hmm.
authoritarian oppression, what they're doing is they're trying to read into the whole of Islamic history their conception of Islam as an authoritarian, other.
Mhm.
And that image of Islam actually comes from the whole way in which Islam was constructed as anti-enlightenment when the whole idea of the study of religions was developed within the West. And
I
so they
see.
want
I
to
see.
read that into every instance of
I see.
Islamic history.
So
That any
basically, it's
instance of
yeah.
Islamic history
Mhm,
where they can
mm.
read that narrative into it, they'll take it.
So basically, it's the Orientalists. They are reading too much into the incident. They're saying that it's anti-enlightenment. It's just giving. They're trying to give an impression that Islam is authoritarian, as you say, and even though basically the whole event was not such a big deal, right?
I don't know if it's a big deal or not. I'm saying we don't know. I'm
Okay.
saying people are trying to read things into this history
I see. I see.
that that's an interpretation
All right.
of what little information we have regarding what exactly was burnt, what were the alternatives, how were they written. I mean, a lot of this
Mm,
has to do with, remember that there's this is a time
mhm,
when the Arabic script is still not settled. I mean, this is something that happens over a period of time. So how exactly were other people, necessarily writing it? And this is something where there's been a lot of good work that's being done recently by Ahmad al-Jalad and others on the actual development of the Arabic script.
Okay, so maybe let's talk a bit about Ahruf and Qiraat. I mean, earlier on you were saying that there is this distinction actually between Ahruf and Qiraat, and even Muslims get confused between the two. Maybe you can explain what are the differences between Ahruf and Qiraat, especially.
Uh, the Ahruf is just a hadith. Okay, well, what is it referring to? We don't know.
Oh, okay.
The Quran was revealed upon 7 ahruf, and there's the stories of one companion, reciting in another companion, then coming and saying, no, that's not how it was revealed, and then they go to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he says, no, it can be recited in both ways. Well, is that the exact qiraat that we have? Well, we don't really know.
Okay.
And so the 7 qiraat that came down later, and then the 10 qiraat a few centuries later, that was an effort at standardization that does not necessarily reflect the modes of recitation that were prevalent at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and not even necessarily the modes of recitation that were most present, that were most widespread within the ummah just 100 years before this was kind of written down and penned in a single book. So this is again something where it's like the whole idea that there's been one history to it, and it's always just been as it currently is. That's something that Muslims need to realize. There's a lot more to our history going on than that. But that doesn't really challenge necessarily what we would think of as the collection of the Quran, the rasm of the Quran as we know it, being done under the caliphate of Uthman. And then that rasm became the basis for multiple different qira'at. And of those qira'at, there were actually there was a multitude. And in the earliest centuries, it's you go through the shadh readings, and there's something like up to I think over 80 different qira'at. I can't remember the exact number that we would have, but this is really it's actually a rather large number Haytham Sidqi has shown that when you get into the regional variants of the manuscripts, that there were some of the regional variants that were based upon a qira'ah, a recitation style, or were preserving a recitation style that is not among those that were then kind of declared as being the ones that were mutawatir by Ibn Mujahid when he penned his book on the Qiraat in the 4th century.
Okay, right. So can we actually say that the Quran, as we know now, 114 surahs from Surah Al-Fatihah up to Surah An-Nas, can we conclusively say that this is the same Quran, this with its numbers, with the number of surahs, as it was during the time of the Prophet?
I don't know exactly what you mean by that, because exactly how were these numbered and things like that.
Yeah.
That's can we conclusively say? I mean, look, the problem is that a lot of Muslims, when you say that, they think you're talking about this. All right, they think it
Okay.
was like, I mean, they literally think it was like that, and so no, it wasn't like that. All
Oh,
right, so
okay.
I mean, you
All
want
right.
to get down and you want to say, see, here's one of the problems. All right,
Okay.
is
All
that
right.
people are trying to say that according to the particular methodologies of the historiographical methods developed within Western academia, that we can prove this. All right, proof is a high measure. All right,
Mm-hmm.
but we can say that within a narrative, this is a very high probability
Mm-hmm.
narrative. And was it recited exactly the same way? Exactly? Not exactly sure, but pretty darn close. All right. And so, and like you say, I mean, we have whole entire manuscript traditions. Like there's a Neo-Basrian manuscript tradition. This is what Haytham Sidqi has proven.
Mm-hmm.
That is on a different qira'ah. And that one is not actually one of the ones that is preserved by Ibn Mujahid. I mean, this brings up that there are some interesting variants. There's the reading of Hanafi, there's the reading of Ibn Kathir, Ibn Amr, Abu Amr, Asim, Hamza, Al-Kisai, things like this. Well, then there are other readings that were actually widespread. Does that mean that the Quran was not preserved at the time of Uthman? And does that mean that the preservation of Uthman was not a faithful preservation of what was done during the time of the Prophet Muhammad or the Quran as it was known during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? No, it doesn't mean that. Do people want to interpret it that way? Yes, they do. What they're doing is they're basically trying to take what they see as thin little wedges within the narrative where we don't have everything. You're not going to have a documentation for everything from 1400 years ago. You're not going to have a piece of paper for everything from 1400 years ago. So they're trying to take those little things within the narrative and try to take everything else apart. It's like people trying to go and say, people spoke about George Washington having wooden teeth. Well, George Washington didn't have wooden teeth. He had teeth that were actually other people's teeth that were collected. And so does this now blow in our entire narrative of the history of George Washington? No. George Washington probably did not cut down a cherry tree, as they say. I'm sorry, I'm going through my own history tree and say I cannot tell a
It's
lie or
okay.
something like
It's
this.
okay. Yeah.
This is,
Yeah.
but these things, so people, it's like going into those little pieces of it and then trying to demolish all of American history because we have little pieces within the narrative that don't fit, or that other people, that are stories that people developed because it gave them a picture of the history that they liked more. That's just not very, those things of going in, okay, here's the place where we might have a tiny little place where we don't have an exact piece of historical, verifiable material evidence between here and here. That doesn't mean that we can then go read a whole bunch of other stuff into that gap necessarily. We go with what is the most likely narrative, and for the most likely narrative is probably going to be the one that was most widely preserved by the historians who were closest to the time.
I see. I see. So it's actually funny that you mentioned the story of George Washington, because last month I had a conversation with Dr. Dale B. Martin, New Testament scholar, and he pretty much used the same analogy with George Washington as well, like what you did. So I guess it's interesting. Yeah, he's a New Testament scholar, so but he was arguing it. Of course, his traditions, of course, is different, so he was arguing it in a different way. I just want your feedback on that, maybe after listening to that. Maybe you can share your thoughts on it as not only as a Muslim but also as a historian yourself, as someone who studies
Well, I mean,
Quranic
this
studies
is one
scholars.
thing. This is actually a big problem that you find with a lot of scholars of Christian history in the West, is that they actually there continues to be an idea that the history of early Islam must have been the same as the history of early Christianity,
Mm,
and that and they don't understand that we actually had a lot of there was a tradition within Islam that was interested in history qua history. And this is where
mm,
you have things like Abu Amr Adani. We don't have, there's nothing in the Christian tradition like Abu Amr Adani going around and collecting all of the Masahif and looking for regional variants and trying to trace them all back and see where these variations come from. And when it comes through it, like as well, like when I was telling you about the research of Haytham Sidqi, where he finds out that there are about like 18 to 20% or something of the corpora of manuscripts from the pre-canonical period that are on a non-canonical recitation system. Right. Well, these don't really. I mean, this is actually what Marjan van Putten says about this. Is that these manuscripts aren't going to contain world-shocking readings that would overturn how we understand the text, but they do say a lot about the kind of freedom that reciters had in this period, which does show us there wasn't, this kind of oppressive system of you must read it, necessarily in this kind of way. And it does say something about the overall process of the canonization of the Qiraat, and that process was probably a little bit looser and freer than Muslims tend to think. But this isn't going to overturn the story of the collection of the Quran. And people will go in and say we had as many early Muslim sects as the Christians did. This is simply not how it is. There's a great analogy that one of my colleagues once said, is that the early history of Christianity is like you've got a train going across a plain, and then all of a sudden that train enters a tunnel, and you get a window here and a window here and a window here, and so you can kind of see some aspects of the development. And then the train comes out on the other end, and it's a completely different train. And you're like, well, how did that happen?
oh,
How did
that's
we
a very
get
good
from
analogy.
there to here? Well, a lot of that we don't fully know, and so a lot of the history of early Christian of studying the early Christianity and studying the Bible and the collection of the Bible and how that came to be and how some of these letters and gospels came to be in the form that we now have them, that's trying to fill in a lot of those gaps. Within the history of Islam, it's like we've got a train that's going across a field, and it's going across, and it's going across, and it's going across, and it goes into a tunnel for a little bit, and then it comes out of the tunnel. And at no point
Mm,
is the entire train in the tunnel. So you've got these places where we don't exactly see what's
mhm.
going on
I
necessarily,
see.
and
I
a little
see.
bit. So like the Qiraat, what were these manuscripts that preserved non-canonical readings? What was the significance of them? We don't exactly know. How
Mhm.
necessarily did the regional variations of the different manuscripts come to be? Well, we
Yeah.
don't exactly know.
Yeah.
But the fact that some of them are actually like that they are consistent across all of the regions in how they use the ta marbuta and the ta maftuha
Mhm.
is amazing, and shows even more of a unified tradition than we would think the existence of regional variants would give us. And this is what the research of Marjan van Putten has shown. None
Mhm.
of this says anything about whether or not this is revelation. All it says is that this is a well-preserved tradition. And that's an important thing. Revelation is not something that you can prove through historiographical methodologies. And
Mm,
when people start to try to prove it, they don't realize that it's kind of like trying to use, it's trying to prove to people who are colorblind that color exists. You can't really do it. That's a different matter. It's a whole different register. And I think people need to be honest about that and not try to say that such and such proves that the Prophet ﷺ was a prophet of God. No, it proves that he was a historical person, that there is a historical record of when he existed. It proves that the Quran is that the story that Muslims have given about the preservation of the Quran is really, really close to what actually happened. And there are a few gaps, like, for example, we don't exactly know why we got the order that we got. And even in the historiographical record, there's some accounts, there's differences of account as to, and Al-Asami gives this, is that, so you have like there's either the prophetic ordering, where it was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or there's a prophetic ordering with the exception of Surah At-Tawbah, or there was a thing where the companions came in to do the ordering, or there was the completion of the companions of the prophetic ordering. I kind of think that just given the way things work historically, probably that fourth alternative, which is it's given by Ibn Atiyah, it might be given by others before Ibn Atiyah in his Tafsir al-Muharrar al-Wajiz, but that is kind of logically the most likely thing that happened. Is exactly what we don't know. And so these are things where, yeah, there's a little bit of okay, what was the basis of that ordering? And that's where, you know, it would be nice to know, but we can't say with 100% accuracy whether or not that is exactly it. And that, I think, is, you know, for example, things that some people have meant by saying that we don't have, that there are some places where we're not exactly sure of the record. And that, from the perspective of faith, that's not a problem historically. Because even if you had all of that down historically, you still would not be able to prove revelation, because that's something that is of a transcendent vertical order, and all of our historiographical methodologies are for tracking things that are of, you know, the horizontal order of time.
Of course, of course. So basically, you're saying almost the same thing as Dr. Martin said to me. Okay, I think it was way later in the video where he says that you cannot use, for example, the laws of physics upon to judge history, right? Because it's totally different sciences, right? Would you agree with that statement? Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You also can't use the laws of history to judge revelation.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, so I guess you on that point, you and Dr. Martin are on equal terms. Both of you do agree on that. So let's talk about the manuscripts. Okay, this, I think you would love to talk about the manuscripts more than any of this history stuff, would you? So maybe let's talk about the Sana'a manuscripts and the Birmingham manuscripts and their significance to the scholarship of the Quran. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think I've addressed some of that already. I mean, you know, the manuscripts are, again, I mean, we have, you know, when you get down to it, you know, the Sana'a 1 manuscript is probably the most important. It isn't the whole of the Quran. I can't remember exactly what percentage of the Quran is in that, but when you put together all of the manuscripts that are dated to the 1st century of Islam, it's something like 98% of the Quran with all of those within all of those different manuscripts. And the Sana'a 1 manuscript is actually particularly important because, as the work of Behnam Sadiqi has shown, that when you put ultraviolet lighting on it, that there was this iron-based, what they call iron galatinate ink that was used at the time, and that this iron-based ink, it can actually absorb long-wave ultraviolet radiation. And so you can actually see what you could call the undertext of the palimpsest. A palimpsest is a piece of parchment where you've wiped off what was there before, and now you've written a new text on top of it, because the earliest Quran manuscripts, this is before paper, they were written on animal skin. So when he went and he did this study where you actually look at the undertext and then put together that undertext, And that parchment, you find that it actually corresponds to the reading of Abdullah bin Mas'ud. This becomes fascinating because up until the time in which Behnam Sadiqi did this research, many people stated that the early Muslim accounts of these different Muslims preserving the Quran and stuff, that this was just stories, and that it didn't really happen and things like this. And so by doing that, it really opens up the whole door to actually say we have material evidence which points to the veracity of the historical accounts that the early Muslims were giving of how the Quran was collected. And then, of course, you've got the issues with the carbon dating of the manuscript as well. That puts it right within the time of Uthman. So when you put together that, also, I mean, people have tried to make stuff about the what was the Birmingham manuscript. People have
Birmingham
tried to
manuscripts, yeah.
make hay about that, to try to put the dating of the Quran earlier than it was. I mean, this is one of the most amazing things, that if you really look at several revisionists, what happened is when this manuscript studies came about, and you could not any longer maintain that the Quran didn't come about in its current form until the late Umayyad, early Abbasid period. The manuscript tradition just clearly overturned those particular speculations. So you had a handful of revisionists that liked this narrative. Well, what did they do? They shifted. This is when we had a shift back to the idea that you've got the Quran actually developed before the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so, they've only got one manuscript that they can really glue onto for that narrative, which is this little fragment that's known as the Birmingham manuscript. And that Birmingham manuscript is part of a manuscript of which there are also a few folios in France. I forget the exact number of the one in the library in France.
Oh, I forgot the name. Yeah, but I think I know which manuscript you're referring to, but probably I
Yeah,
forgot the name as
out
well.
of three. Yeah, it's in the
Yeah.
national. It's in
Yeah,
it's
it's in the
in
National
the
Library in France.
yeah,
In
in the
yeah,
Paris National Library,
yeah,
Bibliothèque Nationale Française. Yeah,
yes. That's the manuscript I was talking about. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So that's not the Tübingen, huh? So okay, maybe I got
No,
it
that's
wrong.
not Tübingen. Yeah,
Yeah, I got it
I
wrong.
think
Yeah,
something that has like something like 45% or so
yeah.
of the Quran, when you put
Hmm.
together all the various fragments of it.
Wow.
And some people have tried to say, it has a wide range on the carbon dating. So some people have tried to use that to shift the whole argument back to say that the Quran, even before that, people were trying to make this argument that there must have been they tried to make the argument that there was a Christian community, and that the Quran was closer to an Aramaic Syriac document
That sounds
of some
like
kind.
Christoph Lusenberg's theory.
Well, so there was the Luxembourg thesis, which is just ridiculous, and then there was the other people have tried to do variations on that and put a kind of an almost more scholarly spin on the Luxembourg thesis. But again, look, the fact that the Quran is in dialogue with various intellectual strands within the Near Eastern milieu there's no doubt to that. And this is where, for example, the work of Angelika Neuwirth is actually helpful for Muslims to take this into account. What is the dialogue that is occurring with these strands of thought, theology, other things within the ancient, the late, the Near Eastern milieu of late antiquity? Situating within that and realizing what these discourses are is actually very helpful. That, for example, can help us understand what's going on with Surah Al-Kahf and the narrative of the Ashab al-Kahf, because the narrative of the companions of the cave was the most kind of widespread narrative of awliya and that existed within within late antique Christianity. And so that becomes interesting. So what is the Quran actually? So the Quran is entering into that dialogue, and it's saying something about this story of which there were multiple variations. And that, you really can't deny it. So that's actually useful. And that's one of the things that Muslims have to be aware of is, well, Angelika Neuwirth, in one of my recent articles, I critiqued her for saying that we need to completely separate biblical studies, Quranic studies and tafsir studies, and she likens them to, if you were to study the Bible with the tradition of the early church fathers, And I'm saying, well, actually, it's not, because the tafsir tradition was asking historiographical questions, and was very well aware of the actual reality of the history of the development of the Quranic text. You could even point to sciences such as, asbab al-nuzul and nasr as being sciences that are about identifying how historiographical elements influence the understanding of the text. So, anyways, to kind of cut a long story short here, those are important elements that one needs to take which sciences are useful and which sciences aren't. Like, for example, all of these manuscript studies that we're talking about, this is all a science of identifying the dates of manuscripts, sciences of stemma and stuff that are adopted from methodologies that were developed in accord with other manuscript traditions and are now being applied here. In that sense, that's just pure material science. What the conclusions that you then draw from that, different people are trying to make different conclusions. I personally say, well, the most widespread narrative, if it doesn't contradict it, then it's most likely the most accurate narrative.
And I don't think it does, you see. So basically, I think you just answered Dr. Martin's question when he said that, well, he claimed that biblical scholars are more honest about their tradition than the Muslim scholars. But I think you just answered by that question by
Yeah,
quoting
I mean,
from the
that's
tafsir.
a thing. That's a thing that a lot of people, I mean, that's something that the West likes to pride itself on that particular claim. Whereas Muslims have been trying to identify the historical origins of the Quranic text from
Yes.
the very beginnings.
I think from what you have told us already, what we know now and what you have told us, it's clear that Muslims have been doing internal textual criticism way before the biblical scholars of today, right?
I mean, there was a period of time when you could say that some of it wasn't being done in the same way. But the thing is that within the traditions of the Old Testament studies in particular, you say, how did this book come together like this? And then you start to realize it's a hodgepodge and we don't understand. And then they start to assume that every book of late antiquity and of a religious origin must have come together in the same way. I mean, that's essentially what Wansbrough is doing. Wansbrough is basically speculating that the Quran came together in the same way that the various books of the New Testament came together. And he's got nothing other than speculation for that. And it eventually, and even when he finds that finds hadith traditions that completely overturn this particular assumption, he then even has to try to date those hadith collections later and say, no, they were actually put together by the students of this person, and they weren't actually his book. And it's just like you don't get to do that. You don't get to just pick and choose and say, okay, this doesn't fit my speculations, so I'm gonna date it. I'm gonna put it at a later date.
I actually have a lot of Quranic stuff. I have a Toshihiko Izutsu here as well,
Oh, Izutsu's fantastic.
But he doesn't talk about the history of the Quran. He talks more about the text, right? More about the meaning.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why a lot of Western scholars don't like Toshihiko Izutsu is that because Izutsu basically accepts the Muslim account of the history of the text and then begins his analysis based upon his linguistic analysis, based upon accepting that history and accepting that the pre-Islamic poetry is in fact a record of the language as it existed before the Quran.
Of course. So okay, so I guess maybe we can wrap this up. Maybe we can conclude. You can talk about what is the takeaway from learning about our tradition, about the history of the Quran, and maybe some words about how we as Muslims should deal with these accusations. That the Quran is imperfect, and that there are revisionist attempts to rewrite the history of the Quran. Maybe the takeaway from all of this. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think different people are going to deal with it in different ways, but I think that one of the overall efforts, one of the things that we need to realize is where these particular understandings come from, and rather than necessarily trying to, one of the mistakes that Muslims make over and over again is to try to claim that they can give, historical proofs, for example, for the fact that the Quran is a miracle. We didn't even get into the idea of
Yeah. Yeah.
the ijaz of the
Yeah.
Quran and the letter
Yes. Of
miracle.
course.
But I
Of
mean,
course.
that's where But what you can do there, you can't prove that it's a miracle. You can prove that it has remarkable consistency as a text, as a literary text. So don't go in and say, "Oh, this proves that it's a miracle, that it's a revelation." No, that's like trying to prove to somebody who is colorblind that something is red. There's no way to do that. But you can prove that this thing has a different hue than this thing. All right. And so this is where you get in. And this is where, for example, the work of Fadl Saleh Samarra'i is incredible. And he goes in and he shows how every instance of, for example, the word rih, the singular of wind, differs from the use of the word riyah, the plural. How every instance of ghawth in the Quran, or a downpour, differs from the instance of from the use of matar, rain, in the Quran. So there are actually very technical differences in how they are used. And then you go into where you look at and you find that there are as many instances of dunya in the Quran as there are of the word akhirah, and things along these lines. There is just this incredible consistency across the text. And also, Behnam Sadiqi, the only people who have actually done statistical stylometric analysis of the Quran. Based upon that stylometric analysis, they have concluded that the Quran is of a single author. Now, other people have come and they've kind of challenged that methodology a little bit. Well, none of them has gone in and done as rigorous a stylometric analysis. So the only people who have actually gone in and done that stylometric analysis have concluded that it has remarkable consistency across the text and that it is of a single author. And then you start to go into the fine details of how different words are used and how different phrasings are used, and actually find out that these have very specific indications that pertain to the context in which they are used. None of them are accidental. And so that's where you get into say, okay, fine. You'd say somebody who was extremely intelligent knew what they were doing in the composition of the entire text across the board. And on that level, you can make a particular argument to people. But if you want to go in and argue to non-Muslims that this means it's a miracle, that's a different kind of argument. But a lot of Muslims, unfortunately, begin with I want to prove to you that it's a miraculous text. And so that gets problematical. And this is,
Yeah.
again, one of the things that happens when Muslims are doing that is that they are already, they don't realize it, but they are accepting the paradigm of kind of Eurocentric epistemologies, and that they, in a sense, have to prove the revelation, or that this is revelation within that, and in a sense accepting that the standards of Eurocentric epistemologies are in fact the standards that we need to meet, whereas they are very different. It is not universal. This is one of the most fundamentally important things for Muslims to realize in the current day and age, is that the Euro-American epistemological academic tradition is provincial. It pertains to a particular region. It is the thought knowledge structures of a particular people and of a particular culture. It is provincial. It is at times quite parochial. It is not universal. And it is not necessarily meeting its particular provincial and parochial standards that proves or disproves Islam.
Exactly. So, you make me feel ashamed of myself because, I have engaged in those fallacies that you just mentioned. As an
No,
apologist,
this is very deep.
sometimes,
I mean, this
yeah,
is, look, my
yeah,
recent article on decolonizing Quranic studies,
yeah,
addresses some of this, and
yeah,
it's, we have to have the epistemic confidence to
yeah.
stand within our own tradition.
I see, I see. Yeah, because you see, as an apologist, sometimes I do slip into that fallacies you mentioned, because we face, me being an apologist, of course, I face Christians. Well, my special, I don't know whether I told you this, but my specialism is actually in Judeo-Christianity. So I do have, Christian books, and I read a lot of the New Testament textual history and so on. And that's why I think you can see that from my
Uh-huh.
Q&A with Dr. Martin, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, to my shame, I have to admit to you that I actually know more about the history of the New Testament than I do the Quran. Okay, but I am learning. I mean, I have read books from Quranic studies like years ago. Before I started going into the New Testament and so on, I did do that, but that was years ago. I think now that you have mentioned this, and speaking to you, I think I myself have to do some islah for myself too, and I need to go back to the books and reread the Quranic studies as well. So anyway, thank you, Dr. Lumbard, for being with us today. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for your wisdom. So anyway, thank you for the viewers. Thank you very much for watching or listening to this podcast. If you like this video, please do not forget to give a thumbs up. If you would like to share this video, please do so and spread the word to everyone. And please do not forget to subscribe to this channel. Inshallah, I'll meet you again in a future episode. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.